A piano tuner does not work in a noisy room. He cannot. The instrument requires absolute quiet for him to hear the subtle differences between a string that is slightly off and a string that is exactly right. Differences so fine that any background noise would swallow them whole. So, before he ever touches a single key, he closes the door, he silences the room, and only then does he begin the painstaking work of bringing each string into the precise tension that produces true sound. I want you to sit with that image for a moment, because it explains something about your life that you have likely misunderstood for a long time. The quiet season you are living in right now, the one that feels like absence, like being overlooked, like a love story that has gone, curiously silent, is not God forgetting. To act, it is God closing the door, it is the tuner's room. And what he is tuning inside that silence is not your circumstances. It is your heart's capacity to hear and recognize a frequency that noise would have made impossible to detect. Your heart has a frequency. It was built that way, designed with a particular resonance, a particular wavelength, a specific pitch that corresponds to the person God intends for you to spend your life with. And right now, in the quiet you have been enduring, he is tuning that frequency with the same precision a master craftsman brings to an instrument he intends to play beautifully for decades. The silence is not the absence of his work. The silence is the condition his work requires. 1 Kings chapter 19 records one of the most important sound-related moments in all of Scripture. Elijah stood at the entrance of a cave, and a great wind tore through the mountains. But Scripture says plainly that the Lord was not in the wind. Then an earthquake shook the ground, and the Lord was not in the earthquake. Then a fire blazed across the landscape, and the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, after all the dramatic, overwhelming, attention-demanding sounds had passed, came a still, small voice. The Hebrew phrase is even more precise than the English translation suggests. It describes a sound of thin silence, a frequency so delicate that it could only be perceived once everything louder had been stripped away. God did not raise his voice to be heard over the noise. He waited for the noise to end. And what he is doing in your quiet season follows the exact same pattern. He is not shouting over the chaos of a crowded, hurried, performance-driven life to get your attention. He has brought you into a season where the noise has been removed specifically so that the frequency he wants you to learn, the frequency of true discernment, the frequency of recognizing what is real, can finally be heard. Here is what most people misunderstand about love before this season teaches them. Otherwise, they believe that finding the right person is primarily a matter of search, of putting themselves in enough rooms, meeting enough people, optimizing enough profiles, until the right one eventually appears. But search without discernment produces noise, not recognition. And discernment is not something that develops in crowded rooms, it develops in silence. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 5 describes this precise capacity. The purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. Deep waters, not surface impressions. Not the noisy first encounters that produce excitement, but little actual understanding. Deep waters, the kind that can only be drawn out by someone whose own heart has learned to listen beneath the surface. And the capacity to listen beneath the surface of another person's heart is built almost entirely in the seasons when your own heart was forced to sit quietly long enough to learn what true signal sounds like, as opposed to what mere noise sounds like. Every loud, fast, hurried connection you have walked away from. Confused was an encounter your untrained ear could not yet properly interpret, but the quiet season you are in now is training your ear. It is teaching you the difference between a voice that resonates with the actual frequency of your design and a voice that simply happens to be loud enough to get your attention. There is a phenomenon in physics called resonance, and it offers one of the clearest pictures available for what God is doing in your waiting. When two objects share the same natural frequency, one of them can cause the other to vibrate by proximity alone, without ever physically touching it. A tuning fork struck in one room can cause an identical tuning fork across the room to begin vibrating on its own, simply because the frequencies match. But if the second tuning fork is even slightly different in its construction, slightly different in length, in mass, in material, no amount of proximity will produce that resonance. The first fork can vibrate as loudly as it wants. The second will remain still. This is precisely why proximity to many people throughout your life has not produced the resonance you were hoping for. It was never about being close enough. It was about whether the frequencies actually matched. Amos 3:3 puts this in relational terms with deceptive simplicity. Do two walk together unless they have agreed to do so? Agreement here is not negotiation. It is resonance. It is the kind of alignment that does not require convincing because the frequencies were already compatible from the beginning, and the silence you are living in right now is the specific environment in which God is adjusting your frequency, refining it, clarifying it, removing the static and interference that years of noise had introduced, so that when an aligned, healthy individual enters your life, the mutual recognition and shared values will be unmistakable. You won't have to force a connection that is naturally built to last. You will simply recognize a shared clarity that aligns seamlessly with who you have become. Now, here is something that deserves direct and serious attention, because it explains exactly why the tuning process requires the silence it does. A string that is even slightly out of tune does not sound dramatically wrong to an untrained ear. It sounds close enough. It can even sound pleasant in isolation, but play that slightly off string alongside an instrument that is correctly tuned, and the dissonance becomes immediately, uncomfortably obvious. This is what happens in relationships built before the necessary tuning has occurred. A person whose interior life carries unresolved wounds, unexamined patterns, and unrefined responses to conflict may feel perfectly fine in isolation, even attractive, even compelling. But the moment that person enters the sustained proximity of a covenant relationship, every slight dissonance in their interior tuning becomes audible in ways that solitude never revealed. Psalm chapter 51 verse 6 names exactly what God is addressing in the silence. Yet you desired faithfulness even in the womb. You taught me wisdom in that secret place. The secret place, the hidden, unwitnessed interior space where wisdom is taught long before it is ever tested in a relationship. God is not simply preparing you to meet someone. He is tuning the actual interior instrument of your heart, the patience, the security, the capacity for honest communication, the freedom from old wounds dictating new reactions, so that when you finally play alongside another person in covenant, what emerges is harmony rather than the dissonance that untuned hearts inevitably produce. This tuning cannot happen in noise. It requires the quiet you have been given. There is something else this season is producing that deserves its own attention, because it directly addresses one of the most common fears that silence creates. Many people, in extended seasons of waiting, begin to fear that their capacity for love is somehow diminishing, that the longer they go without a relationship, the more atrophied their ability to connect becomes. This fear is not only unfounded, it misunderstands the actual mechanics of what silence does to a trained ear. A musician who practices scales alone in a quiet room for years does not lose their capacity to play with an orchestra. They develop the precision that makes playing with an orchestra extraordinary rather than merely adequate. Isolation in the service of discipline does not diminish capacity. It refines it. Song of Solomon chapter 8 verse 7 describes the kind of love this refining process is preparing you for. Love is as strong as death. Rivers cannot wash it away. Notice what is being described. Not a fragile love that needs ideal circumstances to survive. A love strong enough to withstand the floods. Deep enough to remain whether the proximity to other people has been abundant or scarce. The strength of that kind of love is not built in seasons of constant social activity. It is built in the quiet, where your capacity to love faithfully is being tested and proven in the absence of an audience, so that when the audience finally arrives in the form of a spouse, what they receive is not an untested theory of love, but a demonstrated refined, proven capacity. Your silence has not been wasted on inactivity. It has been the practice room where your capacity for covenant love has been getting stronger the entire time. I want to address one more dimension of this tuning process because it concerns something that the noise of comparison constantly tries to disrupt. Every tuned instrument has a specific pitch it is being brought into alignment with, a reference tone, a standard against which every adjustment is measured. For your heart, that reference tone is not the timeline of your friends, the relationship status of your peers, or the cultural expectation of what your life should look like by a certain age. The reference tone is the specific design God built into you before you existed. Psalm chapter 139, verse 13 declares it directly. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb, knit together, not assembled generically, not produced from a template applied to everyone, equally knit, with the kind of individual attention that produces a frequency entirely particular to you, and the silence you are enduring is the process of bringing your heart into alignment with that particular frequency, rather than the false reference tones that comparison constantly tries to introduce. Every time you measure your weighting against someone else's timeline, you introduce noise into a tuning process that requires precision. Every time you allow the volume of other people's relationship announcements to drown out the quiet work God is doing in you, you delay your own ability to hear the frequency clearly. The tuning is not behind schedule. It is simply happening according to the only reference tone that has ever actually mattered, the one God built into you from the beginning, the one that has nothing to do with anyone else's timeline at all. Let everything that has been said settle into its full weight now. The silence you have been living in is not evidence that God forgot the sound of your name. It is evidence that He is doing the kind of work that silence alone can accomplish. He has been closing the door on the noise so the tuning could happen with precision. He has been stripping away the dramatic distractions, the wind, the earthquake, the fire, so that the still, small frequency of true discernment could finally become audible to you. He has been refining the interior tuning of your own heart so that when a covenant arrives, what plays is harmony rather than the dissonance of unresolved wounds. He has been strengthening your capacity for love in the practice room of solitude, so that what you eventually offer is proven rather than theoretical. And He has been aligning you to the only reference tone that has ever mattered, your own particular design, knit together before you existed, entirely untouched by the noise of comparison. Romans chapter 8, verse 28 carries the whole season in its arms. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. All things, the silence, the waiting, the seasons that felt like absence but were actually attendance, God present, working, tuning, refining with a precision that noise would have made impossible. You are not out of tune, you are being tuned, and what God is preparing you to hear, what you are being prepared to recognize, is a mutual depth and shared value so clear that when a healthy connection arrives, you will both have the foundation needed to build what lasts. You will simply begin, almost without effort, to vibrate in response to a frequency you were always designed to recognize. If this message reached the quiet place where you have been wondering whether the silence meant something had gone wrong, if you are navigating this quiet tuning room right now, I'd love for you to share your perspective in the comments. Let it be a simple space where you write down how you are learning to cultivate patience, or how this message met you exactly where you are standing. Share which part of this message gave language to your specific season, because someone scrolling through the comments today needs exactly the reframe you are about to put into words. And if this channel keeps giving you the language for seasons that felt impossible to explain, subscribe. Because your spirit deserves a consistent source of truth that does not rush you out of the quiet before the tuning is complete. New messages are released regularly, each one written for the heart that is still in the tuning room, still learning to trust the silence, still becoming ready for the frequency that is coming. You are not forgotten in the quiet. You are being prepared by It and the frequency God is tuning you toward is worth every moment of stillness it has required.